All right. Finally, for our fifth example here, we have a problem that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for us. And this is a multi-step problem that we're going to have to solve. What we want to do is write a function called olympicScores that takes an array of numbers that are, say, the scores for an Olympic event. And then we want to remove the highest and lowest score from that array and return a new array without modifying the original. And for this problem, we're going to assume that the scores are in the range from 1 to 10. So down here, I've already written a little shell for us, but down here we have some sample data. So let's say our scores that we want to filter are 10, 8, 8, 9, 5, and 10. So we need to know, when we look at it, we see that we have 10 as the highest, and it occurs twice, and we have 5 as the lowest. Now, we don't want to remove every instance of 10, but only the first instance of it, or the last instance, only one. And because there's only one low score, we're going to remove that. So once we call olympicScores on this data set, it should come back as 8, 8, 9, and 10, with the first 10 and the first 5 removed. So to do this, we need a couple things, and we're going to see a new pattern, which is kind of a testing match pattern, or a best match pattern, maybe we'd call it. I'm not sure if it has an official name, but it's something that you'll be using a lot as you learn more programming. So we're going to loop through the list, the entire list, and we're going to pull out the highest and the lowest score. And we're going to remember the index of each of those so that we can remove it later on. So we need some variables. We'll say let low, and the lowest possible score will start with 10, and let high, and the highest possible score initially will be 0. Actually, we'll start with 11. We're going to go 1 outside of our range. And then let's also create a low index, and that can be 0. That doesn't really matter. And a high index, and we'll initialize that to 0. Those are definitely going to change during our array, so the initialization here doesn't really matter. Okay, so now the basic algorithm is to go through every score in score. And if that item is higher than high, it means we have a new high score, and we're going to reassign high to be scores I. And we're going to reassign the high index to be I. So let's do it just for the high score. So if, and because we're going to keep using scores I, let's actually put it into a variable to make our code easier to read. So let score get scores I. So if score is higher than our current high score, this means we have a new winner, and high is now going to be equal to score, and the high index is going to be the current index, which is I. So what we've done, once we get here, and let's just log this out as we go. Do a little template string here. Okay. So by the time we've gone through, we've traversed the entire array of scores. High will be the highest score in that list, and the index will point to it. So let's just run this and see what we get, what output we get. Oh, I didn't get the template string because I used regular straight quotes rather than our backtick. So let's just try that again. Okay, so the high score is 10, and the index is 0 because it's in the first position. let's add a conditional statement inside our loop for the low score. So if score is less than low, low gets score, and we'll keep track of its index and low index. So let's just duplicate this. Low and low IX. All right, we'll run it again. So, well, we didn't update our text. We'll say low, run. Okay, so this first part is working. We're able to iterate through the scores and pull out the high score, the low score, the high index, and the low index. So now our next task is just to copy or clone the scores array and remove those indices from it. So early in the chapter, we saw how to make a clone of an array. So we'll just call this one SS, and we'll call scores dot slice. And if we slice with no parameters, it returns the entire scores. Now we know the indices we want to delete, and when we're deleting from the middle of an array, we saw that we can do that with the splice method. So the first part is the index. So we'll say low index, and we want to delete one item at that index. And then we're going to do the same thing for the high index. And when we're done, we're going to return the modified array. So when we do this, when we slice it into a new array, we leave scores the way it is initially. So what we're going to do now, once we run this code, we'll just log out the two variables that we have. Okay. So, of course, even though we call this scores and we call our parameter scores, they're not the same variable. But in this case, because they're objects, they are pointing to the same memory location, to the same reference. So if we were to do splice on scores in here, it would change scores outside the function. That's not what we want. Whenever we can, we want to write pure functions, functions that don't modify the data they're working with, but only return new data. Okay, let's run it, and hopefully scores will continue to look like this, and modified scores will look like this. All right, that looks like it works. Let's just take a step through, and then we'll wrap up our last example from the arrays chapter. All right. So I said that I was introducing a new pattern, and we introduced a more complex version of it, but we're going to keep track of something, and we're going to look for a winner as we iterate through the array. So the first thing we need to do is initialize that variable to a value that makes sense. And a lot of times you can just make the first element in the array be the value because it's the default winner. But in this case, because we know our range is from 1 to 10, I thought it might be clear if we say that the low score will be 11, because every score in the set will be lower than that, and the high score will be 0, because every score in the set will be higher than that. And we're going to keep track of both the scores, because we need to continue that for our tests, and the index, because at the end we're going to need that to delete them from the array. We traverse the array of scores, and we run each test. We look to see if the current score we're looking at is greater than the high score. If that's the case, we have a new winner for the high variable, and we assign the current score into high, and we keep track of that index in our high index. Then we check to see if we have a new low score winner by seeing if the current score is less than the latest winner of the low score. If it is, we assign that score into low, and we record the current index into low index so we can use it later. When we get down to this part in our code, we're confident that we know the highest and the lowest score, and we know the index of both of these items. So what we do is we use slice with no arguments to create a clone of the scores array. So we have a new array that doesn't point to the same reference. And then we splice out one item at low index to delete that from the middle, and we splice out one item at high index to delete that from wherever it is in the array. In our case, it was the first 0th element. Then finally, we return the clone, and we just put a little bit of code in here to run it and test it out.